The many mistakes of the Disney Princess franchise. If you've been watching this channel for a while now, then you know that my relationship with Disney is complicated. And over the years, I've reviewed dozens of their films, ranked some of their most iconic characters, and delved into their unique path to success. While the Walt Disney Company has had its fair share of financial struggles in the past, in recent years they've managed to crack the code to staying on top: branding. And there's no better example than the Disney Princess franchise, which has become a multi-billion-dollar empire that spans movies, theme parks, music, and merchandise. Like a lot of people, I have a soft spot for the Disney princesses. After all, they practically raised me. But by turning these characters into a brand, Disney has rewritten their mythologies in ways that don't always sit well with me. Character designs have been changed, backstories tweaked, personalities altered, and relationships erased. And while some of these revisions have quietly slipped under the radar, others are impossible to ignore. In today's video, we're going to be taking an in-depth look at the Disney Princess franchise, from the removal of Esmeralda from the lineup, to Ariel's many redesigns, to the weird spin-offs that never really took off. Let's get into it. Like a lot of big companies, Disney has a separate subsidiary that handles all of its merchandising ventures, Disney Consumer Products. And while they had seen a significant rise in revenue throughout the 1990s, thanks to the overall success of Disney's films at the time, as they neared the new millennium, sales began to plummet. Wanting some fresh ideas, in December 1999, they appointed Andy Mooney as the new president of DCP, but little did they know that he was about to revolutionize the entire company. According to legend, only 1 month after taking the job, Mooney went to his first Disney on Ice show, where he saw dozens of little girls dressed up as different Disney princesses. Because Disney wasn't actually selling those sorts of products at the time, these outfits were cobbled together out of generic children's Halloween costumes, and Mooney realized that there was a demand that Disney wasn't satisfying: a fairy tale lifestyle. And who better to market that fantasy than the very same characters these young girls were already projecting themselves onto? Mooney quickly got to work on a new franchise called the Disney Princesses, which lumped together some of the company's best-known female characters under a single pink and sparkly umbrella that promoted beauty, grace, happiness, and love. The concept was subsequently licensed out to dozens of companies, and soon the Disney Princess label was on everything from dolls to pajamas to coloring books. Ordinarily, before taking a brand like that to market, there would have been a series of focus groups, but in a surprise twist, Mooney launched the line with almost no feedback. The Disney Princesses had a rather slow start, generating a mere $100 million in revenue when it first launched in 2001, but it quickly picked up steam, and by 2004, that number had skyrocketed to $2 billion, with many industry insiders calling the concept genius. Although Disney had been marketing and licensing their characters for decades, prior to this point they were isolated to their individual movie franchises, meaning characters from Cinderella were sold alongside other characters from Cinderella, and characters from The Little Mermaid were sold alongside other characters from The Little Mermaid. The Disney Princess brand was a huge departure from this pre-existing strategy, and many people within Disney's animation division protested Mooney's decision as they felt it confused the characters' mythologies and tarnished their reputation. Now, there had been a handful of media crossovers that featured various Disney characters over the years, but they were usually odes to Disney's entire legacy, not just their princesses. The main examples of this were in print advertising, but in the 1988 film, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, you can see several Disney characters hanging around Toontown together. It wasn't until the 1990s that we finally began to see the princesses get paired up together more frequently, likely because of their overall popularity and prevalence during that era, and these early crossovers included VHS tapes, dolls, and soundtrack albums. While working on Fantasia 2000, Michael Eisner, then CEO of the Walt Disney Company, pitched a segment that would include a magical ceremony featuring 6 of the princesses and their love interests. Initially appearing like a coronation, it would eventually be revealed as a christening, with each of the couples having their own child. After a good deal of pushback from the animation department, who considered it an abuse of the characters and Walt's legacy, the idea was scrapped, but it proved that there was a growing interest within the company to group the princesses together. In 1998, years before Andy Mooney came up with the franchise, a Disney Princess magazine was even launched in the UK with the slogan, "Every girl can be a princess," and included comics, crafts, coloring pages, and games, all inspired by Disney's female characters. Although the magazine was originally its own thing, it eventually got swallowed up by Mooney's brand, and it's still the #1 guide to all things Disney Princess. When the Disney Princess lineup was originally introduced in 2001, it included 10 characters: Snow White, Cinderella, Tinkerbell, Aurora, Ariel, Belle, Jasmine, Pocahontas, Esmeralda, and Mulan, most of which are still a part of the brand to this day. But there are two notable exceptions. Esmeralda made a few appearances in Disney princess-themed media and merchandise in the late 90s and early 2000s, but by 2005 she had essentially disappeared, and nowadays Disney barely acknowledges her existence at all. Although there's never been an official explanation for her removal from the Disney Princess lineup, there are a few running theories within the fandom. One is that with The Hunchback of Notre Dame being frequently criticized for its depiction of Romani people, the Catholic Church, and disabilities, Disney might have wanted to distance itself from the film entirely. Although similar complaints certainly haven't inspired them to remove Pocahontas from the lineup. Another theory is that Esmeralda herself didn't fit Andy Mooney's idea of what a Disney princess should be, being more openly flirtatious and sassy than the other girls, which might have been why Megara from Hercules didn't make the cut either. The other theory, and the one that I personally subscribe to, is that she simply didn't sell well enough for them to keep her around long term. Tinkerbell had been one of the company's most iconic figures since she had first appeared back in 1953, becoming as recognizable to the brand as Mickey Mouse. But if you ask me, her inclusion in the Disney Princess lineup didn't make a lot of sense. Regardless of their royal status, all of the other characters were human, which tied them together in a natural way. But Tinkerbell was a teeny tiny pixie, and her giant wings and magical powers made her clash with the rest of the group. Now, they didn't write her off nearly as quickly as Esmeralda, with Tink being included in several Disney Princess collections over the course of the 2000s, and her sales figures were apparently high enough that Disney felt comfortable giving her her own franchise. In 2005, she was officially removed from the Disney Princess lineup and switched over to the Disney Fairies, which was intended to appeal to slightly older children with its more mature color palette and rebellious characters. And nowadays, hardly anyone remembers Tink being a Disney princess at all. At one point, it seemed as though Disney was toying with the idea of adding Jane Porter from Tarzan to the lineup, with the character making a handful of appearances in Disney Princess magazine in the early 2000s. There's several theories as to why she wasn't selected, but these are the two that stick out to me. First was her appearance, with her yellow gown and brown hair making her look a little too similar to Belle. Sure, there are minor differences like their eye colors and hairstyles, but that isn't something a child would pick up on when browsing a toy aisle. The other reason is probably the biggest factor: copyright. Unlike most Disney movies, which were inspired by fairy tales and legends that were firmly in the public domain, Tarzan was based on the 1912 book Tarzan and the Apes, requiring it to be licensed to them by author Edgar Rice Burroughs. Although Disney got permission to make the film, it wasn't as easy for other things, which is why the characters never appeared in the House of Mouse TV series and are rarely ever made into merchandise. Besides Disney not being particularly good at sharing, following the lackluster reception to the 2001 series The Legend of Tarzan, they probably felt like Princess Jane just wasn't worth their time. I also suspect that Alice from Alice in Wonderland was briefly in consideration to be a Disney princess, making several early appearances in magazines, soundtrack albums, and toy lines. The biggest piece of evidence, in my opinion, is the fact that she was included in the Kingdom Hearts video game, which is renowned for its loyalty to the Disney canon, and they had to have gotten permission to include her with the other Disney princesses somewhere. The reason I think she wound up being cut from the lineup was because she just wasn't as glamorous as the other girls. Not to mention, she was also a good deal younger, without so much as a love interest or a fancy dress. So in general, she just read as more of a little sister type than a proper princess. Back when the characters were sold separately, it didn't matter if they happened to share a physical resemblance, but now that they existed in a single franchise where they occasionally interacted, Disney needed to ensure that kids were able to tell them apart even when they were placed on the same shelf. Mooney figured that the easiest way to do this was by giving each princess a distinctive color palette, a fairly innocuous decision that has had untold repercussions in the years since. In the past, Aurora was often marketed in both her pink and blue gowns, which made total sense in the context of her story. But this started to cause problems once she and Cinderella started hanging out, since Disney also had a habit of putting Cinderella in her mother's pink dress. With both characters being blonde, it was easy for kids to confuse them with one another, so they decided to make them look as different as possible, with Aurora getting a pink dress and Cinderella a bright blue one. Although I'm a huge proponent of Cinderella's dress being silver and Aurora's blue dress being more appropriate for her character, from a business standpoint, I can accept that the change made sense. I just think it's funny that even Disney themselves seemed unsure about the decision, with both girls making appearances in the wrong color multiple times in the brand's early days. Most of the Disney princesses have a casual and a formal outfit in their films, and their more glamorous dress is usually the go-to in marketing. With that in mind, throughout the 1990s and early 2000s, it was pretty common to see Jasmine in her purple outfit more often than her teal one. I personally thought that this was a great choice, since it was not only canonical, but also made her look more regal. And in the early days of the Disney Princess brand, it seemed as though the plan was to continue marketing her in purple, since the color wasn't included elsewhere in the lineup. But as most of you know, that didn't stick. The teal outfit does have more screen time in the film, so kids no doubt associated her with that color more than purple. But that same argument never applies to Aurora's blue dress for some reason. And I personally think that the teal switch was actually because of another princess, Ariel. The problem child of the Disney Princess franchise, Ariel's iconography has created a bunch of issues over the years. With more in-universe outfits than most of the other princesses, Disney had a lot of trouble deciding on just one as her official look. Although I've always been a fan of her date night outfit, it was probably too casual for the Disney Princess brand, so they tested out her more flashy looks instead. You'd think that her pink dinner dress would have been the obvious choice from the beginning, but it seemed as though they were unsure if it was too similar to Aurora's new look, which I suppose is true if you ignore their respective hair colors. On a handful of occasions, she was marketed in her bridal attire, but I think Disney quickly realized that that wouldn't work long term, because parents probably weren't too keen on putting their 6-year-old in a wedding dress. They eventually decided to market her in shades of purple and green as an ode to her mermaid form, which is without a doubt her most memorable look, but it wound up causing some significant overlap between her and Jasmine, something that was exacerbated by their similar crop top situations. Instead of giving Ariel 2 colors at once, the only Disney princess other than Snow White with that luxury, I wish that they had committed to green or purple, not both. Since she's a redhead, I personally think that she looks best in green, which would have let Jasmine keep her purple outfit, but I wouldn't have complained if it had been the other way around either, since Ariel does eventually wind up wearing purple in the Little Mermaid sequel, but I guess Disney wasn't thinking that far ahead. It wasn't uncommon to see the princesses depicted in themed outfits like ballet dresses, winter coats, or springtime fashions. But in 2007, the entire franchise had an official refresh, with the princesses adopting golden gowns to symbolize their hearts of gold. This change was also an attempt on Disney's part to combat growing criticisms that the princess brand promoted dated stereotypes, and they figured that gold was a big enough shift from the brand's signature pink to get parents off their backs. Because yes, even back then, Disney's response to controversy was to do the bare minimum and completely miss the point. To accompany this new golden look, they'd planned to launch Disney Princess Enchanted Tales, a series of direct-to-video films that would feature new animated stories centered around Aurora, Jasmine, Belle, Cinderella, and Mulan. However, after the first installment's poor performance, the entire Enchanted Tales franchise was scrapped, and the princesses soon returned to their previous color palette. Side note, in one of Aurora's scrapped Enchanted Tales stories, we see her don a blue and pink dress, which I think was going to be Disney's attempt at ending the age-old debate about which color she should be wearing. Around the same time, Disney began to realize that there was no age limit on princess-themed goods, and they began paying more and more attention to their adult audience, something epitomized by the 2007 collection of Disney fairy tale wedding gowns, with each dress being loosely inspired by one of the Disney princesses. Honestly, the idea was genius. After all, when you think about Happily Ever After, odds are your mind goes straight to Disney, so it made perfect sense for them to cash in on young women's desire for true love. In the years since, Disney has continued to fulfill these nostalgic fantasies with kitchenware, luxury jewelry, baby clothes, and cosmetics, creating an endless cycle, with little girls carrying their love of Disney princesses into adulthood and then passing it on to their own children, who pass it on to theirs, and so on. In 2007, Disney considered adding a new character to the Disney princess lineup, Giselle from Enchanted. It had been 6 years since Mooney had come up with the concept, and they were beginning to worry that the brand had lost its shine. So with Giselle being incredibly popular with both young girls and grown women, it felt like a perfect way to shake things up. Similar to Jane, there was a legal issue that prevented Disney from accepting her with open arms, namely, that they would have to pay actress Amy Adams for the lifelong use of her image. And like we said, Disney doesn't like to share, which is why to this day, enchanted merchandise is hard to come by. In 2009, Tiana from The Princess and the Frog was added to the lineup, even getting a coronation ceremony, and she became the 9th official Disney princess. I always loved Tiana's blue dress, like it was truly a jaw-dropping moment, but the green wedding gown tied into her storyline more, so I can understand why it was chosen as her signature look. Not to mention that at the time, the lineup was already reading pretty blue thanks to Cinderella and Jasmine. To celebrate Tiana's inclusion, the other Disney princesses received bejeweled redesigns to make them look like quintessential royalty, with a few of them even getting capes and ruffs. In the past, Pocahontas and Mulan usually didn't get a new look, but I guess Disney finally remembered that they existed, although compared to the other girls, it still felt like they got the short end of the stick. Pocahontas had historically been marketed in her one-shoulder indigenous outfit, but there were a handful of occasions when Disney stuck her in the European ball gown from the 1998 sequel. The 2009 redesign was one of these instances, and while I loved this look as a child, there's no denying that it was wildly inappropriate considering Pocahontas' heritage, and I don't know why they didn't just try to give her normal outfit an update. Disney's inclusion of this dress in official marketing does set a precedent when it comes to using sequel clothing, meaning Ariel's purple dress could have totally worked. Mulan probably had the least consistent looks of any of the princesses, with Disney taking inspiration from several of her outfits from the movie. The green and the blue hanfu at least made sense for her character, as they're what she wears when she's being true to herself, but Disney also had a habit of putting her in her pink matchmaker outfit. While it did read as more princessy, it felt like a complete betrayal of her character, which you'd think would defeat the purpose of the brand. Her bejeweled redesign leaned into this more hyper-feminine direction, but I did like how they at least kept it somewhat rooted in traditional Chinese fashions. In 2011, they added Rapunzel from Tangled, bringing the lineup back to its original headcount. I know there's a lot of discourse about whether or not Rapunzel should be marketed with her blonde or brown hair, but come on, she's Rapunzel. You can't have her walking around with a bob and expect kids to recognize her. Keep in mind that when Tangled was in development, the Disney Princess brand was already something the animation department had to keep tabs on, which is why in early concept art, Rapunzel was given a dark green dress to differentiate her from their other blondes, Cinderella and Aurora. Even after her dress was changed to its now signature purple, there was little to no overlap between these similar-looking characters. However, a few other problems started to appear. As part of Rapunzel's coronation, they gave the princesses another sparkly makeover, with Jasmine's teal outfit being swapped out for purple, and Ariel's pink dress being given purple accents. Like I said, she's the problem child. Besides this causing her and Rapunzel to look somewhat similar, the dress itself didn't really read as Ariel, and overall, these redesigns wound up making the lineup look way too homogenous. Just look at Belle and Pocahontas. In 2013, Merida from Brave was added, making her the only princess to be created by Pixar, and the first to not have a romantic relationship. I know a lot of people don't like Brave, but as a total mama's girl, I was happy to see Merida in the lineup, even if her inclusion wound up causing even more issues. To try and unify the different art styles of their computer and traditionally animated characters, they gave everyone yet another redesign. Newer characters like Rapunzel and Tiana got off easy, with their outfits just getting more sparkles. Cinderella, Aurora, and Belle got modern hairstyles that looked straight out of Pinterest, while Jasmine, Mulan, and Pocahontas were given more elaborate versions of their iconic looks. Ariel had the most obvious change, with her pink dress being switched out for a glittery green gown that was completely non-canonical. Even if it would have clashed with Rapunzel, I think they should have put her in purple, because the green just wound up making her and Merida look way too similar. But I guess Disney only cared about that sort of thing when it was Aurora and Cinderella. That same year, Disney released Frozen, and Anna and Elsa were no doubt originally intended to join the lineup. But after the film became a surprise hit, with there even being a worldwide Frozen shortage, Disney made the decision to keep them separated, determining that the marketing boost that came with being in the Disney Princess franchise wasn't necessary to ensure Anna and Elsa's success. And yeah, they were right. After years of criticisms directed towards the Disney Princess lineup, the company decided to create more independent heroines to counteract the ones the public deemed too passive. This resulted in Moana finally being added to the lineup a full 3 years after she was first introduced, with the initial hesitation no doubt being exacerbated by her canonical insistence that she wasn't a princess. In the 2018 movie, Ralph Breaks the Internet, Disney poked fun at the franchise and its popular tropes, with all of the official princesses up until that point, as well as Anna and Elsa, befriending Vanellope von Schweetz. The entire sequence is peak 2010s, with the princesses donning cheesy graphic tees, sipping frappuccinos, and weekly calling out double standards. But what I find most notable is that they put Ariel back in her pink dress. Thank God. The Disney Princess brand has always been a sort of rising tide lifts all boats situation, but even I was surprised when they added Raya in 2022. Sure, she really is a princess, which you can't say about every character in the lineup, but her film was such a box office disappointment that I figured Disney would just shove her in a vault and pretend she never existed. I'm pretty sure they also planned to add Asha from Wish to the lineup, but with both the character and the movie being so poorly received, they must have figured it wasn't worth it. Not to mention that they were already struggling to highlight all 13 of their existing characters equally, and I doubt they could have handled another one. Since the creation of the Disney Princess franchise, certain characters have been given more attention than others, something that's probably attributed to their overall marketability. In the beginning, Pocahontas and Mulan were often sidelined in favor of Cinderella, Sleeping Beauty, Ariel, Belle, Snow White, and Jasmine, something best exemplified by the Japanese manga series Kilala Princess, which only included those 6 princesses. As a kid with long dark hair, I always gravitated towards Pocahontas and Mulan myself, and was constantly disappointed that their merchandise wasn't as easy to come by, which kind of turns into a chicken or the egg scenario, because if Disney isn't making merchandise with them to begin with, how could they ever hope to get as many sales as the other princesses who are more widely available? As the years passed, a new pattern emerged, with the more glamorous princesses being favored over the more adventurous ones, and Merida and Raya became even more of a rarity than Pocahontas and Mulan. Of the newer additions to the lineup, Rapunzel has been the most popular, often replacing Snow White in merchandise, and with the overwhelming success of Moana 2, I wouldn't be surprised if Disney starts pushing her even harder, especially since a live-action movie is also in production. Speaking of which, most of the Disney princesses have received the live-action treatment at this point, including Aurora, Cinderella, Belle, Mulan, Snow White, and Ariel. And Disney has already confirmed that an adaptation of Tangled is in development as well. This leaves only Pocahontas, Raya, Tiana, and Merida, who I suspect Disney will only turn to when they've completely run out of other cash grabs. When Andy Mooney first created the Disney Princess brand, he wanted them to exist in a sort of vacuum, or as my friend Babbity Kate calls it, the pink void, where they'd be staring off into space and avoiding eye contact in an attempt to maintain their individual mythologies. While they were usually pretty good about this early on, aside from a few playful slip-ups, it wasn't until much more recently that we've seen them throw caution to the wind and depict the princesses fully interacting, which I actually don't mind as long as it's true to their individual characterizations. Over the years, there have been thousands of articles and hundreds of videos claiming that there are official requirements to be a Disney princess, but I want to make it abundantly clear that Disney themselves have never provided an explanation behind their choices. In fact, the closest they've ever come is when Maui makes fun of Moana, and even that doesn't completely ring true. I mean, Raya doesn't wear a dress, and Aurora's only sidekicks are the fairies. And if it was really as simple as that, then almost all of Disney's female characters would be Disney princesses. The rules that you often see making the rounds on the internet are just making assumptions based off of the existing lineup, which is why there are often exceptions to said rules. Now, we can all agree that they have to be human or humanoid, but that criteria feels so obvious, I don't even know why it needs to be mentioned. Because if you genuinely thought that Kiara was going to become a Disney princess, I don't know what to tell you. I've heard some people say that being animated is a requirement as well, but again, I don't know why that needs clarification. And it's not even entirely true anyway, since they considered adding Giselle, who's human for far more time than she is animated. You'd think that being royalty would be one of the prerequisites. After all, it's in the name. But Mulan is just an ordinary girl. Sure, I've seen people say that because the emperor honors her heroism, she's an honorary princess. But there are a bunch of female characters who've saved their kingdoms and haven't been rewarded with Disney princess status. Being royal doesn't grant you automatic entry either, as evidenced by Elanwi and Kida. With that in mind, let's just be honest with ourselves, it's totally random. Disney is just trying to guess which combination of characters will bring in the most money. If you're a Disney fan, then I'm sure you've also heard of the glove theory, one in a long line of cockamamie Easter eggs invented by BuzzFeed that went viral in the 2010s and were accepted as fact within the fandom. The basic idea is that Disney always gives the princesses who marry into royalty opera gloves, citing Cinderella, Belle, and Tiana as evidence. Ignoring the fact that Pocahontas used to be marketed with gloves as well, I think it's just dependent on the style of dress the character is wearing, which is itself dependent on the setting of the story. So it's less a rule and more a coincidence. Now, before we end this video, let's discuss some of the other franchises that were inspired by the success of the Disney Princess brand. Around the same time the Disney princesses were being developed, Disney created a Big Brother line intended to appeal to young boys. Called the Disney Adventurers, the line was more action-driven, with the original lineup of characters including Hercules, Aladdin, Peter Pan, Tarzan, and strangely, Captain Hook. A few years later, the line was rebranded as the Disney Heroes, with Merlin and Arthur, Robin Hood, Prince Philip, Li Shang, and eventually Milo Thatch being added to the roster. If the Disney princesses were the definition of traditional femininity, then the Disney heroes were peak machismo, with the characters wielding giant swords, fighting wicked villains, and flashing, dashing smiles. The Disney heroes struggled to find an audience, something Mooney credited to the gender's different play patterns, and in 2006 the line was shelved permanently. However, Disney did seem to be considering another rebrand, with leaked concept art showing the characters in a more stylized fashion that made them look like they'd come straight out of a comic book from the 1980s. I actually think this new direction looks pretty cool and could have served as an interesting starting point for a Gargoyles-esque TV show that saw the characters working together to save their magical world. This also could have let them introduce female heroes like Megara, Esmeralda, or Kida, allowing them to market the characters who weren't able to join in on the Disney princess fun. I even think that this concept would work well today, but with Disney deciding to not make any more short-form animated content, I guess we'll never know what could have been. Another line created in conjunction with the Disney princesses were the Disney villains, who were first grouped together for the 1999 video game Disney's Villains' Revenge. The original lineup included Captain Hook, the Evil Queen, the Queen of Hearts, and the Ringmaster. 2 years later, they released the direct-to-video movie Mickey's House of Villains, which added a few more characters including Hades, Jafar, Ursula, Cruella de Vil, Maleficent, and Chernabog. For several years, the franchise continued to utilize a variety of Disney's most villainous characters, making it difficult to create an official lineup, but the ones who popped up most frequently often correlated to a member of the Disney princesses. In 2007, Disney launched the short-lived Dragonkind franchise, which was no doubt inspired by the popularity of other dragon-focused media at the time, like the Inheritance Cycle or Dragon Tales. Initially launched as a series of statues, the line included Mushu from Mulan, Maleficent from Sleeping Beauty, and Elliot from Pete's Dragon, who were all given more formidable redesigns. The premise of the line was somewhat unique, with the dragon's world being reimagined so they were the dominant species. Although Disney expressed an interest in expanding the line, the initial Dragonkind launch must have underperformed, and it was shelved soon after, which doesn't necessarily surprise me, considering Disney actually has a pretty limited roster of dragon characters, at least ones that kids would actually care about. Although if they did bring it back, they could maybe add in Sisu. Although there were several brands loosely inspired by the Disney Princess formula, the first official spin-off were the Palace Pets in 2013, which followed a group of animals who were befriended by one of the princesses. Disney committed to the line pretty quickly, with a popular app, web series, books, and toys. It was clearly an attempt to ride the wave of Littlest Pet Shop and My Little Pony popularity, but I had literally never heard of it until researching this video. Some of the media tie-ins would explain how the princesses met their furry friends, and then follow the animals' subsequent adventures in the magical world of Whisker Haven. Dozens of palace pets were introduced, but there was a group of 6 who were featured prominently in merchandise. This included Berry the bunny, who belonged to Snow White, Pumpkin the puppy, who belonged to Cinderella, Dreamy the kitten, who belonged to Aurora, Petite the pony, who belonged to Belle, Treasure the kitten, who belonged to Ariel, and Sultan the tiger cub, who belonged to Jasmine. Pocahontas, Rapunzel, Mulan, and Tiana eventually got their own pets as well, but they weren't the focus of the franchise, and of course Merida wasn't mentioned at all. Disney never acted like the palace pets were a sincere creative venture, so I can't judge them too harshly. But something about the complete lack of respect for the Disney canon doesn't sit well with me. Most of the princesses already had animal sidekicks to begin with, so why did they need to waste their time creating a bunch of weird color-coded pets to satisfy the kindergarten market? They already had everything they needed. It's funny to think about how once upon a time, the idea of putting the Disney princesses together was sacrilege. But in just 20 years, they've become as big a part of the brand's identity as Mickey Mouse, being treated with both respect and derision. I just wish that Disney understood what made the idea work so well to begin with. Sure, it's fun to complain about how ridiculous Ariel's green dress is, or how terrible some of the brand's collaborations have been, but it's by no means the biggest problem currently plaguing the Disney Princess franchise. Whether it's the Powerpuff Girls, the Winx Club, or the Disney Princesses, little girls will always find a character to project themselves onto, and that's what made the original Disney Princess concept so great. On the surface, girls might be drawn to Rapunzel's hair or Aurora's dress, but the princesses also had personalities and struggles that children could easily identify and relate to. In my opinion, that's what's been missing in recent years, with Disney choosing to focus on heroic escapades instead of simple stories with heart. Why is a female character saving herself and her loved ones not enough anymore? Why does she need to save the entire world too? It just feels like they need to go back to their roots and stop trying to fix something that isn't broken to begin with. Which Disney princess is your favorite? I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you soon. Bye!